page is this? 36?
Page Utes, opposite of page 36.
What line? How far?
We're going to start.
2 dots?
No, 8 lines from the bottom where it says Kihine.
Yeah, I have to.
So we took a break for a week. In honor of the Yontiv of Shavuos. So let's recap where we're holding right now. In last lesson, we spoke about truth. The truth of the tzaddik and the truth of the beinoni. And we explained that what is truth? The truth isn't the way the simple isn't restricted to the simple meaning of the truth of the word, which is it something which is factual? So 2 plus 2 is 4 is true, and 2 plus 2 is 5 isn't true. That's a shallow understanding of the word emes, of the word truth. But the way we explained is that the word emes is comprised of aleph, which is the first letter of the aleph base, and taf, which is the last letter of the aleph base, and mem, which is smack in the middle. So truth means something which is always there, from aleph through taf, from the beginning and the middle and the end. Truth is always present. It's something which is always true. In other words, when you say something is true only some of the time, or in certain situations, that's not the ultimate truth, because truth is something which always must be. And the reason why, as we explained last week, is because something, I explained 2 weeks ago, is because something which is true, that means it's intrinsically true. It's true not due to any outside factors. It's not true because of something, but it is true. And if something is only present at certain times and not at others, or in certain situations and not in others, that means it's only true because of those outside factors, or because the situation makes it true. But it's not true in all times. So what is the ultimate truth? The ultimate truth is the avodah, the service of the tzaddik, because it's consistent, and the service of the tzaddik and the love that the tzaddik experiences for Hashem doesn't change and it doesn't falter. It's always there, and the fact that it's always there, that itself tells us that it's the truth of who the person is. It's not dependent on anything else. And then we talked about the beinoni. So in comparison to the avodah of the tzaddik, in comparison to the avodah of the perfect person that serves Hashem with perfection and with perfect love, the beinoni is the person who struggles. The beinoni doesn't feel love for Hashem on a consistent basis throughout the entire day. Although the beinoni is able to arouse a love for Hashem during davening. So since it isn't something which is ever present, it isn't consistent, so therefore that's not emes lamitase, the ultimate truth. However, says the Alter Rebbe, still it is truth. Why is it truth? Because the fact that the beinoni has the ability every single day during davening to, again, arouse the love for Hashem, that means that even if it isn't always there in an actual sense, it's always there in potential. So there's a certain emes to that also. So, in comparison to the avodah, the service of the tzaddik, so the avodah of the beinoni is not considered emes. However, in relation to itself, the avodah of the beinoni is still considered to be 100% emes, 100% true. And now we're going to do a little Kabbalah on this. A little Kabbalah on emes. We know that the midah of Yaakov Avinu, of the three Avos, of the three patriarchs, Yaakov Avinu symbolized emes. As the pasuk says in Micha, Titein emes liYaakov, which means that Hashem gives a special degree of emes, special measure of emes, which is by Yaakov. Now, that right away tells us that emes has to have some sort of additional meaning, because if Yaakov is emes, but not Avraham and not Yitzchak, what Avraham and Yitzchak were false, chas v'shalom. However, to a much greater degree, we see emes by Yaakov Avinu. And where do we see that? We see that Avraham Avinu, not all his children were Jewish. Not all his children carried on his legacy. So therefore, it's missing in the emes. Emes means something which is not changing, non-changing, which is eternal, and which lasts forever. That wasn't by Avraham Avinu. And Yitzchak also, his legacy was not carried on by all his children, only by one of his children, by Yaakov, as opposed to Esav. Yaakov Avinu, where do we see Yaakov Avinu's emes, Yaakov Avinu's truth? We see that in the fact that all of Yaakov's children, all of his 12 children were all tzaddikim, but more than that, all of Yaakov's children for all generation are Yidden and have neshamas, which tells us that Yaakov was endowed with a special measure and degree of emes, which wasn't by Avram, which wasn't by Yitzchak. Also interesting that we find that the Gemara says that Yaakov Avinu lo yimes, Yaakov never died. Yaakov is still alive. We don't find that by a statement regarding Avraham Avinu. We don't find that statement regarding Yitzchak. We find that only regarding Yaakov, which over here also, that's due to the special measure of Yaakov, of emes, which Yaakov had. And if emes is something which is eternal and non-changing and doesn't depend on circumstance, so therefore also the life of Yaakov is eternal and not changing. And as the Rabbi brings out, and it's also brought down in Kabbalah, that we know Avraham and Yitzchak represent. Avraham is the right side. Avraham is love and compassion. And Yitzchak, actually not compassion, Avram is love, and Yitzchak is Gevurah, which is severity and harshness to a degree. And Yaakov is in the middle. Avram's to the right, and Yitzchak's to the left, and Yaakov is in the middle. Incorporates both the chesed, the kindness of Avram, and the severity of Yitzchak, and Yaakov is in the middle. And according to Kabbalah, everything in all of creation is divided along these three lines: the right and the left and the middle. The right being you're symbolizing Chesed, and the left symbolizing Gevurah, and the middle symbolizing Tiferes, which is also sometimes known as Rachamim, and also that's Emes. And what's interesting is like this: if you look by the Mishkan, so the pasuk tells us that you had the beams of the Mishkan. We're going to learn a little more about the beams, probably, maybe actually not. So you had the beams of the Mishkan, and when you build a house usually with wood, so usually you place the wood one slat on top of another slat on top of another slat. In the Mishkan, it was very different than normal construction in that the beams were standing upright. Right? They were erect. So what kept them together?
The sockets. The
sockets. How did the sockets keep them together? The sockets keeps them erect.
Poles with,
so you had poles. So you had was like this. You had the karashim, the beams were 10 amas high. They were 10 cubits high. We're talking approximately 15 feet high. So on the top third, right by the top third, so you had poles going through. In other words, they had like little what's the word I'm looking for? Rings sticking out of each pole, correct? And they would stick poles through that, so to keep them all together. And then by the bottom third also there were rings sticking out, and they would stick also poles through that.
To hold the boards together.
To hold the boards all together,
the
right?
Crusher,
the crusher, right? So the crusher were standing upright, and then you had the beams connecting them this way, the beams that went through. And then there was also a hole through the middle, right through the middle of all the crusher, not rings, but a hole in which they stuck what's called the Bria Chatikoin. Bria Chatikoin means the central, central pole which held it all together. And what's interesting is that the top ones and the bottom ones, so there you had, for every wall you had two of them. Meaning, let's say one side of the Mishkan, the northern side of the Mishkan was 30 cubits long. So you had one pole of 15 cubits, you stuck one from one side, one from the other side. That's in the bottom. The top also, you had one pole of 15 cubits, another pole of 15 cubits. Then let's say the back wall, the western wall, was 10 cubits, so it's around 15 feet. So you had two poles, one of 5 cubits, 5 cubits, 5 cubits, and 5 cubits. The middle pole, however, was one pole. They didn't have two, only one. So, in a simple sense, it would seem that there was one pole for every wall. So there were 3 walls to the Mishkan. There was no eastern wall to the Mishkan. That was covered by curtains. So it would seem that there were 3 poles, 3 of these middle poles. So how many of the upper poles and lower poles were there? There was 4 for each wall, right? 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. So altogether it was 12, right? So it would seem it was 12 and 3. But the Medrash actually tells us something interesting, which is that the middle pole, which was made out of wood, there was only one middle pole.
wrapped around.
And it wrapped around. Miraculously, it wrapped around.
Made curve.
It made a curve. They stuck in the pole, and when it hit the corner, it made a turn, and it made another turn. So there was one pole which would have to be, how many cubits? We're talking 70 cubits, right? 30 for each wall and 10 for the back. 70 cubits, so that's, we're talking 100, whatever, 120, 110 feet around, and it wrapped around.
That's a tall tree.
Bezalel was 13 years old. How he
Sorry?
Bezalel,
Yeah.
he was 13 years old. How he organized all this, it's mind-boggling.
Probably Ruach HaKodesh, right?
Yeah, you definitely had Ruach HaKodesh. Rashi says so. And if it would have been a 30-year-old person, that would have made sense.
No?
So, that's cute, isn't it? You had this miracle of the middle pole going through. But this is a perfect example. Why is it hard to understand it?
It's hard wood, how you bend, how you...
Well, that's
You soak it.
the definition of a miracle is that it's something which is difficult to understand.
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
what I'm saying. I don't
If
think-
God can turn the water into blood, he could probably also make the wood bend.
Yeah.
Probably with the same laws of physics. Okay. But this is, really the essence of what Chassidus is. It takes these little episodes, these little ideas, which maybe we learned in school, but other than having a certain wow factor, were somewhat meaningless. What does make a difference at the middle pole? But according to Kabbalah, it makes a lot of sense. Because what are we saying? We're saying there's the right side and the left side. The right side is Chesed, and the left side is Gevura. So also the top pole and the bottom pole represent. In other words, the three layers of poles represent the three different, what's called in Kabbalah kavim, the three different lines: the right side, the left side, and the middle side. Now, the right side and the left side, the two sides, they're not eternal. They don't last. They're cut off somewhere in the middle. The middle one, which is MS, it starts in the beginning and goes all the way to the end. It never stops. MS is always, and MS lasts all the way through. So just like Yaakov Avinu had MS, and therefore all his children were tzaddikim, and therefore whatever it means that he didn't die, whatever that means, it's for another conversation, for another time. But the idea, MS, Aleph, Mem, Taf, it starts at the beginning, it goes to the end, it doesn't get cut off in the middle. And actually, if you go to a Kabbalist, he'll tell you that it's not that God decided to make a miracle so that we can take a look at that, and then we'll try to understand what some sort of mystical truth based on that. But if we're to understand that everything that happens here in this world and everything that there is in this world is only a reflection of a deeper spiritual reality, so then the reason why it was that way in the Mishkan was because if there's any place in the world which would be an accurate reflection of spiritual truths, it would be in the Mishkan.
Sure.
So therefore, in the Mishkan, obviously, the middle pole had to wrap around.
The Beis Hamikdash had a similar characteristic.
Possibly, I'm unaware of it, but it's possible. This was expressed in the Mishkan. I don't know if you had that idea of three rows of poles in the Beis Hamikdash, but for example, the same idea can apply to Beis Hamikdash because we have the first Beis Hamikdash, which is Chesed, and the second Beis Hamikdash, which is Gevura, and that's why the first Beis Hamikdash, the Yidden were in the Madrega of Tzadikim, which is Chesed, and the second one they were Bali Tshuva, which is Gevura, and the third Beis Hamikdash, which is the middle one. That's the one that's eternal. I know it's not the middle one chronologically, but that's the Kav HaMtzoi, that's the eternal Beis HaMikdash. That's the one that corresponds to Yaakov Avinu.
That's also the structure of the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, Mem in the middle, and...
That's right, because MS, right, it starts at the beginning, and it lasts through the middle and goes all the way to the end. So this is just another way where the physical reality mirrors the spiritual truth, or it emanates from that spiritual truth. Again, not like, the shallow understanding of it is that God made a trick so that when we look at it, we can say, oh, why is this like this and this like that? So then we'll understand, because in Kabbalah it says that. No, it was an actual reflection of that reality. And especially in the holiest place in the world, it's clear why it was a reflection of that reality.
Rabbi, and the morning tefillah, after Shema, we said Emet, V'yatzi, V'nachon, V'kayim, V'yasha, V'nachon. Everything is the Emet. All this wording is for the Emet.
That's correct. And the ultimate Emet is God. As we spoke, you weren't here 2 weeks ago, but we spoke about that. Why, based on this understanding, why only God is truth. The ultimate truth is only God.
Without end.
Because and God's existence is not dependent on any outside factors or anything else. He intrinsically exists. That's why God is emes. Whereas everything else, their existence, their very existence, is a dependent existence, which makes it not emes. So the only time we're emes is when we're connected to Hashem. That's when we achieve our emes also. So, what's the point we're trying to bring out of here? So you have here all these pieces of wood. What connects all these pieces of wood, all these beams, is the emes. The emes which drills right through the middle of it, the core of it, because the emes is the truth of what the thing is. And with this, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain also how it is. You have this interesting idea over here that we have different truths, and they're all true. But the strange thing is that the truth of a lower level truth in comparison to the higher level truth isn't true. But on its level it is true. Because that is the characteristic of truth, is that it goes from the highest level to the lowest level. And every single level it touches at the truth of that level. So the tzaddik has his truth, the perfect person has his truth, and the Beinoni, the struggler, has his truth.
It's all part of one entity.
It's all one truth. It's all
One
this
truth,
this
but
bria
just a
chatikon, this
section.
long pole,
Yeah.
which bores right through the middle. And the tzaddik, again, the Beinoni's truth compared to the tzaddik's truth isn't true. But on its own it is true, because it is the truth of its own level. And therefore you can have this apparent paradox that you have the Beinoni is truly serving God, and the tzaddik is truly serving God. And then we say, yeah, but compared to the tzaddik, the Beinoni isn't true at all, and that's true also.
So the truth is just dynamic.
The truth,
It's dynamic.
it's ever present. It's
part
present in every single,
Yeah.
level,
Yeah.
in every single level, and in every single person on his level. That's something which is important to understand also. That in every level there's the truth, and sometimes we look at someone else, at a person perhaps who's on a lower level than us.
And it can appear that the same truth is changing by positioning yourself on different facets of observation. So there's a relativity.
There's a relative, yeah. To put in different words, yes, truth is sometimes is not objective, but has to be judged according to its level. And like I'm saying, sometimes we'll look at a person who's maybe on a lower level than us, and we'll question the truth of their service, of their mode of operation. The Jew who comes to Shul only on Yom Kippur, and we'll laugh at that, and and to a certain extent, we have a right to laugh at that. Not to laugh at the person, but because if I only came to Shul on Yom Kippur, that wouldn't be my truth, and that would be a very big letdown for me. So yeah, to a certain extent, I could laugh at that, and for me that's not true at all, but for that person that's his truth. That's where he's expressing his Yiddishkeit. So that's one of the lessons we understand from this, is that there is true, and truth in every level is what that truth is, and we have to strive for our truth, which is the essence of the service of God that we are capable of, and when we arrive at that, that is our truth, and that connects us to all the truths higher than us and all the truths lower than us also. Now let's do inside. Again, so we're going to be doing on page Yutes, which is opposite of page 36, 8 lines from the bottom of the page, where it says, Kihine. Kihine midas emes, the attribute of truth, himidase shel Yaakov. That is the attribute that was personified by Yaakov. Hanikra bria chatikoin, and the attribute of truth is called this middle pole, hamavriach, which bores through min hakatza el hakatza, from one end to the other end, merum hamailus umadrigas, from the highest level, ad soif kol dargan, to the lowest level. Uvachol maila umadriga, in every single point, in every single level, mavriach, it bores its way toich nekuda haim tzois, to the middle point. She nekudas ubechines emes shalah, the truth of that level. Umidas emes, and the attribute of truth, he nachala bli mitzarim, is a heritage which has no borders to it. This is also connected to Yaakov Avinu. If you look in the pasuk, it says that God promised Avram. He says, "Kum hisalach ba'aretz, go in this land la'arko l'rachba, to its length and to its breadth, kilchat nana, because I will give you this land." And then Yitzchak, God says, He promised, and I will give you kol ha'aretz Yisrael. I'll give you all these lands. Yaakov Avinu, what did Hashem promise him? Ufaratzta yama v'kedma tzafayna v'negba. He says, you will burst forth to the east, to the west, to the north, and to the south. So the Gemara says, take a look at the difference over here. That Avram was given a limited amount. He says, go, travel the land, traverse the land, because that which, whatever you see, I will give you. Whatever the land that you pass on, I will give you. Yitzchak also had a limited gift was given to him. But when Hashem tells Yaakov that that your children will be like the dust of the earth, and they will burst forth to the east, to the west, to the north, and to the south, there is no ending to that blessing. How far east can you go? How far west can you go? How far north? How far south? There was no limitation placed on the blessing which Hashem gave Yaakov. And this the Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos, talks about someone who keeps Shabbos properly. So he's blessed with the bracha of Yaakov Avinu, the bracha of specifically Yaakov. Why? Because it's a nachala bli meitzarim. It is an inheritance that has no boundaries, that has no borders. Right? Because the pasuk says, we say before Kiddush Shabbos day, right? V'chalticha es nachalas Yaakov avicha ki pi Hashem diber. What's the pasuk before then? That if those who keep Shabbos, I will give you nachlas Yaakov. So the Gemara says, what is nachlas Yaakov? What is the special inheritance of Yaakov? So the Gemara explains, it means nachla b'li mitzarim. It means an inheritance that has no borders. It just keeps on expanding. And that makes sense now also. Why does only Yaakov get the nachla b'li mitzarim? Why not Avraham or why not Yitzchak? Because again, that's connected to the fact that Yaakov is the attribute of truth. Truth never stops. Avraham and Yitzchak, chesed and gvura, kindness and severity, both have their limitations, where they are and where they're not. But truth never stops. And therefore Yaakov was the one who was blessed with the special blessing of the Nachla B'li Meitzarim.
Rabbi?
Yes.
When you answer a question, aren't you freezing the truth or stopping it or limiting it? If you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. But that's a good thing. That's taking an unlimited concept and freezing it so that you can relate to it, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to. So it's finding an application, but that doesn't limit it essentially, because there could be another answer and a deeper understanding. At this moment, I've caught the truth, which is a good thing. I've been able to tap into it. So that freeze frame allows me to relate to it, but I didn't capture the whole thing. There's more yet to...
So to a certain extent, maybe questions are more important than answers.
And searching for the truth? I would think so. Mm-hmm. The Gemara, there's actually... We know that we have two Talmuds. There's the Talmud Bavli and there's the Talmud Yerushalmi. Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And the Jerusalem, the halacha, whenever there's a disagreement in the two, the halacha is always like the Talmud Bavli, Babylonian Talmud. And why is that? Like I said, there's a practical reason, because the Babylonian Talmud is 100 years, was redacted 100 years after the Jerusalem Talmud. So when that's a general rule we have when you have two, that's not always true, but in certain instances, you always follow the later one because you figure the later one knew about the earlier one, took it in consideration, and still negated it. So therefore, we'll follow the later one. But halacha kibasroi sometimes is a rule. But the deeper reason, that's explained in Chassidus, is that if anyone here ever studied the Jerusalem Talmud, we know it's a very, very different style than the Babylonian Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud is very straightforward. It has statements, it has halachas, it'll tell you stories. The style of the Babylonian Talmud of delving and asking and then answering and then asking a question on that, and to the point that your head is spinning and you go crazy from the back and the forth, and you one hypothesis and then that one is pushed away and we come to another one. So to explain the Chassidus, you arrive at a higher truth through the process of asking and answering and delving and probing. You arrive at a higher truth than if you go straight. And what's interesting is that the reason why the Talmud Bavli had that different style, so we're told it says b'machshakim hoishivani, because I'm in a dark place, zet Talmud Bavli. In other words, Israel is a holier place. Bavel is not as holy. Babylon is not as holy. So in Israel, they didn't have the questions. Why? Because they were in a holier place, in a holier space. They didn't have all the questions. It was much more light. It was much more, they're able to arrive at the truth much easier. So they didn't have to ask all the questions and answers. They arrived straight at the truth. And so you would think that that's the greatest advantage there is. And the answer is no. When you're in the darkness and you have to ask and you have to probe, you reach even at a higher truth than you would have arrived at without the questions, without the darkness in the first place. Mimamakim. But it's a similar idea, actually, because mamakim also means from the depth, from a low place, yeah. So that's an interesting point they bring out. Yes, the advantage is a certain truth that you arrive at only when you keep on asking, and then you arrive at one level of truth, and then another level of truth, and another level of truth. Okay. The Ein Lashir, and the Ein Lashir, it has no limitation. Again, 4 lines from the bottom. The attribute of truth has no limitations. L'mayla adrum ha'mayla, so it goes up to the highest level. V'chol mailus u'madriga shalamata, and every level, which is a lower level, hein ka'ayin, is considered nothing. L'gabe mailus u'madriga shalamayla mahen, in comparison to the levels that are higher than them. So that's the interesting thing, is that you have all truth on every level, but in every level, the truth is takes a quantum leap, and it's a completely higher level, like the truth of the tzaddik versus the truth of the Beinoni. Ki yadu ala yedichein, as is known to those who are familiar with Kabbalah, shebechines reish u'moichen shel madrigas tachtoines, the highest level, the head, the intellect of a lower level, hein lamata, are lower bebechines akvayim, than the ankles, veragli, and the feet, madrigas al yenis mahan, of the levels that are higher than them. K'maymer Razal, as it says in the Gemara, ragli hachayis keneged kulam, the feet of the angels called chayis are the equivalent of them all. So this is a Gemara which says, it talks about the distance. It says that from the earth to the heaven is a distance of 500 years. You know, you have in science, you have the concept of light years, where you judge space, not where you judge space not actually by space, but by how long it takes light to travel. So you have in the Gemara something similar. It says Mahalach Takshan. It's a 500-year distance. I don't know, what does that mean? Traveling by horse and wagon, walking by train. What?
The sky, you saying?
Yeah, 500-year journey. It says the sky, and then it says the sky itself is the thickness of the heaven is 500 years thick. It means it will take 500 years. And then it says between each heaven, because there are 7 heavens, so every heaven is, the thickness of every heaven is 500 years travel, and then between every heaven, the space between is also a 500-year distance. Now, needless to say, this is not talking about anything physical. This is all metaphoric and talking about spiritual levels. But then it says like this, and on top of the 7th heaven, so there you have the angels called Chayis HaKodesh, the angels that are called holy animals. For whatever reason, that's what their name is. Actually, later on, in chapter 38, we'll learn why they're called that. And it says over there that the feet of the Chayis, the feet of these angels, are the equivalent to them all. In other words, add up the distance of everything altogether, and the feet of the angels are the same thing. What does that mean? So the way it's being understood over here, the Kabbalistic understanding of this is, the feet of these angels means the lowest level of the angels. The lowest level of the angels is the equivalent of all the levels beneath them combined. In other words, all of the levels, and what do you mean all the levels beneath them combined? That means they're all equally nothing in comparison to the feet of the angels. And that's why they're all, the 7th heaven and the 1st heaven are all the same thing in comparison to the lowest level of the angels. Which that's corroborating the point that Alter Rebbe is trying to explain in a mystical way, that when you're talking about different levels, the lowest level, the lowest part of the higher level is higher than the lowest level, than the highest level of the highest part of the lower level. So therefore also, the tzaddik and the beinoni, this is our discussion over here, that yes, each one has the emes, and the emes extends to every single, through every single level, but at the same time, the highest level of the emes of the beinoni doesn't reach the lowest level of the emes of the tzaddik. So
Does it have to be necessarily linear and hierarchical? Can it not be more like that center beam, which can curve and kind of catch its own tail?
That's a very interesting question, and I don't know the answer to that.
What was the question?
Whether does it run in a very linear fashion, or can sometimes it curve around, like we find in the center
What
pole?
would be the difference?
It's possible in Kabbalah. It's possible in Kabbalah talks about it.
That's what I'm in your
Anyways, right now we are what's the word I'm looking for? We're floating in very high levels in MS, and we're going to come back down to earth now. But what did we have over here in this chapter? To sum up, we finished chapter 13. We're now going to start chapter 14. So chapter 13 was somewhat of a downer.
What?
Somewhat of a downer. This past chapter. Meaning, chapter 12 described the Beinoni. And in somewhat glowing terms, this is a person who doesn't sin. Who despite his or her struggles doesn't fail. So lest this person get a little too heady, a little too proud of him or herself, the person who is able to manage their struggles and come up on top. So chapter 13 really is telling the Beinoni, it's really focused on, even if the entire world tells you you're a tzaddik, no, you're not. You are a struggler. You're not a perfect person. The evil's still inside you, even if you don't feel it, even if you're studying Torah a whole day, as we discussed. And you should know that in comparison to the truth of the tzaddik, you're nothing. Yes, you have your truth, and that's perfect, and that's fine. But Perikut Gimel was a little, chapter 13, the counterbalance of chapter 12, which chapter 12 describes the Beinoni, a chapter which, and you would think, wow, this person's amazing. Yes, the person is amazing, but at the end of the day, you have to realize it's not a tzaddik. It's a totally different sort of being. It's not the tzaddik. And now, what we've really done up until this point is we've really finished a very important part of Tanya. So let's take you back a little. The first 8 and a little chapters of Tanya were devoted, for those of you who remember, to the basics. Meaning we're laying down the foundation and we are defining the basic terms that are necessary to be able to understand Tanya. So we defined the souls, the 2 souls, the godly soul and the animal soul. And we defined the different components of the soul, which is the intellect and the emotions and the garments, which are thought, speech, and action. And once we laid down the foundation, then in chapter 9 and on, we're saying, okay, so now we should know there's the struggle between this animal soul and the godly soul, and there can be 3 possible results. Result number 1, which we spoke about, which was in chapter 10, is the person whose godly soul is always victorious. That's the tzaddik. The result number 2, which is possible, is the person whose animal soul is overpowers the godly soul. That result of that is the rasha. And then the third possible result, which we studied in chapter 12 and chapter 13, is the Beinoni. The person, again, who, in terms of the mind and the heart, is still struggles in those areas, but practical in terms of thought, speech, and action, does the right thing. So we finished right now defining the basic terms and also defining the 3 types of individuals. Okay, so which kind of individual should we be? In other words, now we have to start applying this to ourselves. Until now, we were somewhat abstract. We were talking about these are the kinds of people that there are. Now, the Rebbe is going to begin chapter 14 with a statement which by now should be pretty obvious. Perik Yudalid, V'hine, Midas HaBeinoni. The level of the Beinoni, Hi Midas Kol Adam, that is the level for every man, every person, every human being, every man, every woman. The Beinoni is their level. Yes, there are some exceptions, some people they'll be able to become tzaddikim and they'll become the perfect people, but that's not for every person. For every person, what is the Beinoni? Va'achareha kol adam yimshech, that is what we should aspire to. Shekol adam, because every person, yachali is Beinoni, can be a Beinoni, b'chol eis u'b'chol shah, at every time. And why is that? Or why and how is that every person can be a Beinoni at any time? So the Rebbe is going to say that it's because of the basic difference between a tzaddik and a Beinoni. To be a tzaddik requires transformation of the heart, and we don't have free choice for that. We are not able to choose what we like and what we don't like. and how we feel, and whether today I'll be happy or not so happy, whether I'm naturally an angry person. Our dispositions, do we have a certain degree of control over them? Can we manipulate them somewhat? Can we modify our hearts somewhat? Yes, but ultimately, it's not fully in our control. Our feelings are not fully in our control. Our behavior is. Being a tzaddik involves completely changing and modifying my feelings. That's not something that everyone can do. Being a beinoni, which means being in control of my behavior, that's something which everyone can do at any moment in time, inside. The beinoni is not repulsed by evil. Being repulsed by evil, in other words, looking at something which isn't godly and saying yich, that's something which is in the heart, and that's something which we can't control. Moreover, as we all know, not all times are the same. We, for the most of us, our spiritual state is constantly in flux. No 2 days are the same, and no 2 times of the day are the same. And even if when I'm davening, I'm feeling all holy, and maybe at time when I'm davening, if I think of something which is unholy, at that time maybe I'm repelled by the notion, but 3 hours later, I won't be repelled anymore by it. So, number one, this is something which is dependent upon the heart, and we don't fully control our hearts. And number two, also, we're always moving up and down. Our hearts are always moving up and down. So being a beinoni does not require that. Ella, what is required to be a beinoni? Sur meirava seitoiv. Stay away from evil and do what's right. The hainu, which means bepoyel mamish, practical. B'maisa dibur machshava, in action, in speech, and in thought. Shebehem, for in these areas, in speech, thought, and action, ha-bechira v'ha-yechelus v'ha-reshus, the free choice and the ability and the permission, the sunnah is given the chol adam to every person. Lasais uladaber lachshav, to do and to speak and to think. Gam mashu neged taivas libay, also that which is opposite of what the heart desires. So neged is against that which the heart desires, v'hepcha mamash, and it's opposite. We have the ability not to listen to our heart. We can't control our feelings. We control whether we act upon our feelings. Even at that moment when the heart is desiring and craving some sort of delectable physical thing, whether it's permitted or whether it's forbidden, Yachal is Gaber, the person has the ability to overpower the feeling, to distract oneself from it, legamri, completely. And how do we do that? What's the mechanism? So what we need over here is the argument of the Alter Rebbe is that I can be a beinoni at any time. It's not a spiritual state, it's not a spiritual level. Right now, when I am in the throes and in the grip of my passion, of my desire, my temptation, I could control that desire and that temptation. When I'm davening, it's easy. And if my heart is filled with love for God, it's easy. But how am I supposed to do that when I am... So the Alter Rebbe is going to give a very short explanation. This short explanation, which the Alter Rebbe is going to give over here, is going to be the topic of around 6 chapters later on, where the Alter Rebbe is going to deal with it more at length, chapter 18 through 25. Actually, that's more like 8 chapters. And here's the gist of it. Every Jew loves God. That's something which is natural, innate, inborn, can't be changed. As the Rambam says, every Jew wants to do every mitzvah and wants to stay away from every avera. It has halachic implications, actually. So, and what's the proof of the fact that every Jew loves God? Again, we're going to talk about this more at length later on. The proof in the pudding are the millions upon millions of Jewish people over the millenniums who gave up their lives for the sanctification of God's name, Al Kiddush Hashem. Why would someone give up their life for God? Only explanation for that is that their love for God and their relationship with Hashem is so important to them that it's more important than life itself. So it's not only that I love God, so I love chocolate, I love ice cream, I love my car, and I love God. No. I wouldn't give up my life for my car, I wouldn't give up my life for my ice cream, but I give up my life for God, which means to tell me that the love is so deep within me that it trumps everything. It's more important than anything that there is. And as we'll discuss in later chapters, unlike in other religions where you have the holy ones, the select few who gave up their lives for their religion, which shows that it was because of a certain level of spirituality that they attained, but Judaism was commonplace. The men, the women, the children, the scholars, the illiterate, everyone gave up their lives for God, which shows that it's something which is innate to the Jewish soul. To put it in simple words, for a Jew, there's nothing that he or she wants more than to have a relationship with God. And when someone comes and says, bow down to this cross or die, the person says, I can't do that. Because if I bow down to this cross, that severs my relationship with my God, and there's nothing that I will do that will, there's nothing that will compel me to sever my relationship with God. You know what the funny thing is? So many of these Jewish people who gave up their lives for God, a month beforehand, a year beforehand, 2 years beforehand, what were they doing? They weren't serving God so great. And they did Averis. They didn't necessarily keep Shabbos. You have these stories, many, many stories about these people.
They gave up their life for their religion.
Right.
A lot of people went on the ground. But there's some people just gave up their life for their religion, or they said that they were and weren't.
Like Moranos.
Moranos.
I know. There are questions on this.
It's the religion.
We could sit and talk about this for 3 lessons, and we will, but it's going to be in a few months.
Okay.
So one more point.
Yeah.
There's so many facets of God. There's so many. How many names of Hashem
72.
are there? Just pulling a name out of a hat. I would imagine the name of God. One of the names of God is justice, or a form of justice, social justice. And a Jew who, like you say, the holistic Jew, feels a connection. It might not be to maybe a formal name or concept of God, but it could be an emanation of God, which is the somehow feeling the need and obligation and the pull from the God of pursuing justice, which is central to Judaism, the pursuit of justice. That could be maybe a form of an undifferentiated, if you will, Yiddish type.
I would like to defer that discussion to a few chapters now, because right now we're going to discuss only what's relevant to our discussion here, and all these things, we're going to talk about this more at length. Keep on coming.
Mm-hmm.
But bowing to the cross one day allows you to honor God the next
That's
day.
chapter 25 of Tanya. It deals with that issue. That's chapter 23. 24, sorry, yes. End of chapter 24. Again, this is we dealt with at length later, but the Alter Rebbe over here, he wants to lay down the foundation. He said, I'm telling you, every Jew can be a Beinoni anytime. I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell. We're going to get back to it more at length later, but here it is in a nutshell. Now, the sad fact is that every time that a Jew transgresses the will of God, aka does an Avera, also known as, in other words, when a person does something, the Torah says don't do it. The Torah says don't eat that cheeseburger, and the person eats the cheeseburger. That's just a crude example, okay? So at that moment, the person is severing his or her relationship with God. The pasuk says very clearly, "Avoneisechem mavdilim beinechem levein Elokechem." Your sins are what separate between you and God. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's no more connection? That's not what it means. It's maybe becomes a one-sided connection or a unidirectional connection, but on a very conscious level, the person loses the sensitivity and the connection and the relationship with God. So what does it mean that a person goes and he eats a cheeseburger one day and the next day he gives up his life for his Judaism? How does that make sense? The answer is it doesn't. In other words, if your relationship with God is so important that you give up your life for it, why are you eating that cheeseburger? You're destroying your relationship right there.
Because it's not seen as such a big deal for many people.
And that's why the Gemara says exactly what you're saying. The Gemara says, Ein Adam over Aveira ela imke nichnas beiruch shtus. That when it says, the Gemara really says that when we, after 120 and we go up to heaven, we're going to ask, why do you do the sin? So if we get a good defense lawyer, the lawyer is going to say he's going to plead insanity on our behalf. Yeah, if you only do that very once, it's temporary. If you do it more often, then it becomes just a habitual insanity. But that's the Gemara says that. Let me finish this concept. The Gemara says that when a person does a sin, the only way a person does a sin is because he's possessed by a spirit of foolishness, idiocy. And why? And this is why. Because every time we sin, it's based on an illusion. And the illusion is, we don't have that much time left, we need to finish the point, we can take questions after. The illusion is, I'm still Jewish. And if I'm still Jewish, I'm still connected to God. I'm still Jewish. I did not lose my essential connection. If I bow down to the cross, then it's over with. But I'm still Jewish. And that's a delusion. What do you mean?
Even when Abraham
what does it mean?
Cheeseburger in Mamre?
That's a good question. But what does it mean? But what does it mean that I'm still Jewish? When I say I'm still Jewish, it means I'm still connected to God, but you're not. When you do a sin, you're severing your relationship with God. So the only way that we sin is when we simply fool ourselves into believing it's all fine. It's all fine. I'm still a Jew. I'm still connected to God. And it's a shtus. So the way, what the Alter Rebbe is going to say is, how do I get over it? When I am tempted, I have to think to myself, don't be deluded. Don't be deluded. You love God. You'd give up your life for Him. Don't destroy your relationship for this stupid temptation that you have over here now. And that thought is enough to deter a person at any time from pursuing his temptation. Yes? Oh, you have a question, huh?
Yeah. We have to have something like it's not in a vacuum, so that if you don't have the relationship otherwise, you just have that mindset that I don't want to sever the relationship, but you have to fill it with something to make the relationship. But if you don't have that, then you're back where you started. You know what I'm saying? Just telling yourself that I don't want to sever the relationship, but if I'm not doing mitzvos, if I'm not learning Torah, if I'm not doing davening, if I'm not doing things to fill the relationship...
The same thing works the other way around. If I'm supposed to do a mitzvah and I'm not, I'm also severing the relationship. In other words, not doing a mitzvah is an avera, if that makes sense to you.
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about someone presumably who's doing mitzvahs.
But either way, if you're not doing things to fill the relationship, then telling yourself, I don't want to sever the relationship...
Well, the person, let's be honest.
Incomplete.
Let's be honest. The person who's not doing anything to build a relationship and is not doing Torah and mitzvahs is not reading this and is not taking this in consideration. We're talking about a person who's trying to do the right thing and wants to do the right thing, and every once in a while, I know it might be difficult for you to believe that some people who actually succumb to temptation in certain areas in life. For people like us, it's hard to understand. Okay, we all do. That's correct. So the question it's not about the larger life choices, but in the moment, what do I do? What is the thought that I'm going to think that this moment is going to deter me from doing that thing which I know I shouldn't do? I want to put it into a different context. The Gemara says, as mentioned earlier, that to do an Avera, and anyone who does Avera is possessed by a Ruach Shtus. And what's the proof for that? What's the proof? So the Gemara says there's a pasuk which is in this week's Torah portion, in Parshas Naseh, and it talks about a woman who is suspected of adultery and being unfaithful to her husband. And So when in describing this woman, who, whether or not she committed adultery, certainly acted inappropriately. In other words, the suspicion hasn't come out of nowhere. She acted inappropriately. The question only is she actually guilty of adultery or not? So the words used by the pasuk to describe is ish ki sista ishtai, a man whose wife sista. What is the word sista? Sista means goes off the way. However, usually often that word would be with whatever. The word sista is related to the word shtus. Hebrew, it's related to the word shtus. So why would a woman go off the way? It's because of a shtus, because of a foolishness, because of idiocy, insanity. So from there we see that someone who does a sin, it's an insanity. So the Rebbe asks a question on this. The Rebbe asks, if you want to prove that every sin is insanity, why are you taking a sin like adultery, which is a very heavy sin? Because then, and say, oh, from here we see that every sin is insanity. No, a person will say, adultery is insanity. But waking up late for shul, let's say that's normal. Adultery is insanity, but indulging on something, or getting angry, or whatever, not giving tzedakah, that's not insanity. So why do we why is the proof for this concept come from a husband-wife relationship? Let me explain something very profound. He says the husband-wife relationship, whenever one of the sides is guilty of an infraction against the other. Let's say husband comes home and gets angry and screams at his wife. Let's say the wife mistreats her husband, whatever it may be. They're not there for each other. Here's the best one. Let's say one spouse is dishonest with the other, lies, whatever may be about the finances. So one may look at that infraction and say, well, lying is a bad thing. Lying is a bad thing. Getting angry is a bad thing. Being nasty is a bad thing, or whatever else it might be. But you'd be missing the point. Is the point here lying? If someone confronts the guy and says, why did you lie to your wife? What's the problem here? Is it the problem that the person lied, or is it the problem that he lied to his wife?
His wife.
It's both.
Because it's to his wife.
But primarily because it's to his wife. In other words, lying is bad. But the issue isn't so much lying. The issue is, who did you lie to? Husband and wife are supposed to be one unit. And any time that a husband does something against his wife, or vice versa, it's a betrayal of the marriage. Or to put it in different ways, we're supposed to be one. At this moment, when I lied to my spouse, I wasn't one. I separated. I wasn't married. I forgot my marriage. And that's the worst thing, not the lie, but that you forgot the marriage. And in this way, any time that husband and wife commit a crime against each other, I don't mean a crime as in going to jail, the larger issue isn't what was done. The larger issue is you forgot that you're married. So there are two different, the same thing exists on two levels. We can look and say, what was the particular thing that you did? How bad is that thing that you did? How bad is it to lie? But that would be missing the point. Or how bad is it to get angry, or any other of these examples that we can give. Or even, one spouse says to the other, pick up something for me from the store. I forgot. How bad is it to forget? But when you forgot, you weren't married. I don't mean that in a literal sense. And the same thing is in terms of our relationship with Hashem. And that's why the example is brought specifically from the woman who betrayed her husband. Whenever we do an Avera, one way of looking at it, how bad is it to eat a cheeseburger? How bad is it not to keep Shabbos? How bad is it to do a small thing? What's a small Avera? Chves. Okay, so there we say, this is a big Avera, this is a small Avera, this is a middle Avera. And we know in Halacha we have this terminology. There are the mitzvahs kalos, the light mitzvahs, and mitzvahs chamuras, and the heavy mitzvahs. But then we're told, don't go, don't go and judge mitzvahs, which one's light and which one's important, which one's more important, which is less important. Why shouldn't I? If this one's more important, this one's less important, why shouldn't I be going and weighing them against each other? And the answer is because we're married. And therefore, when I do an Avera, when I go against God's will, either because He told me don't do something and I went and I did it, or vice versa, He tells me do something, I don't do it, either way is the same idea. The main thing isn't what I did wrong, the main thing is that I betrayed my marriage. I betrayed my relationship. I cut myself off from God. Whether it's only at the moment, whether it's temporary, whether it's permanent, that depends on the type of Avera, but that's missing the point. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is telling us over here. When it comes to doing an Avera, we wouldn't eat on Yom Kippur, even if you really, really were hungry, we wouldn't eat on Yom Kippur. But this other small Avera, this little lie you want to say, this little this, whatever it may be, that little small Avera, not a big deal. What do you mean it's not a big deal? You're married. That's what he's saying over here. I have to realize that every time I'm doing an Avera exists on two levels. There's the actual harm that particular sin does because of the nature of that particular sin. Some sins are more harmful, some are less. Just like if I tell a lie to my wife, how harmful is that? Well, how big was the lie? Okay? But that's only if you're judging the action. But if you're judging the marriage, either way, same trouble. Exactly. And the same thing is Asad Hashem. If you want to judge the sins by the caliber of the sin, or do you want to judge it based on what it does to the relationship? And you know what? Certain sins might have longer term effect on the relationship. In other words, a bigger lie will mean that'll impact the person's marriage for a month. Smaller lie, maybe only for 2 minutes. But don't think about in a month or 2 minutes. Right now, the moment the lie is being said, there's no difference in the big one, the small one. You're not married. Because if you were married, if you were one, you wouldn't say that lie. Same thing with Averas. Some Averas can have a longer term effect and on yourself, on the world, or impact. But at the moment of the Avera, the relationship is severed. And you're a Jew. How can you do that? That's the meditation the Alter Rebbe is saying, that no matter, even when you're in the throes of temptation, and you're really tempted to do something, think about the relationship with Hashem, and realize there's nothing more important than my relationship, and this is a betrayal of that relationship. And that's why the Gemara brings a proof from because it's not only of the adulterous woman, because it's deeper than that. It's explaining why. Not only that every time a person does a sin, it's foolishness. It's explaining why it's a foolishness. Because you're married. Yes.
That would certainly imply that when we keep mitzvos, that more than doing the mitzvah, the relationship is strengthened.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that gives such a chizuk that when you do mitzvahs, it's not just doing that particular mitzvah. But it's the relationship.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant, and we're going to get to that also. This is we're going to do 8 chapters on this topic, really. A mitzvah, you could look at it and say, well, it accomplishes this or it accomplishes that, or it has this advantage or this side benefit, or we could say it's about right now being in a relationship with God, and that's the same in every single mitzvah, which is also for why we shouldn't. Yeah.
Taking that to the next level, if you're doing an independent mitzvah as part of your relationship, you're doing that by definition for your wife also. You're elevating her, you're elevating the relationship by doing that.
That's going off a little on the side, but that would be true.
Okay. Also, the mitzvah you do independently, you're doing for Am Yisrael as a whole. Okay? If you are putting on tefillin, okay, every morning, and I don't, you're doing it for me also. Somehow, I'm benefiting.
That's true.
From your
It's not an excuse, but it's true.
Yeah, not an excuse, but I think it's true.
That's true. Okay, so next week we will do, God willing, inside, that which we did, this whole meditation which we spoke about outside, we'll do it inside and we'll continue from there.